What's up everyone, it's your lawyer, Godot, and today I'm going to lay my thoughts out on alternate universe JoJo scaling in more detail. An example of what I mean is like discussing if part 7 the world scales to part 3 the world. If any of you end up liking this video, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe with notifications on. Really helps out the channel a lot. Now on to the video. Alright, now alternate universe stands do not scale to the OG stands. First, I'll go over guidebook statements whenever part 7 the world is compared to part 3 the world, and when part 8 Killer Queen is compared to part 4 Killer Queen to assert why I think this way. Quote, "The way to stop time after throwing one knife is the same as the world of part 3. The epidemic remains unchanged." Another quote, "It took 5 seconds to stop, but not as much as the third part, except for the knife attack. It's really like Dio, such as sprinkling gasoline and setting on fire. The overall design hasn't changed. It's close to the color of the stand book of the picture book JoJo, a go-go." Another quote, "An unidentified stand with many mysteries. A humanoid stand with cat eyes. Like Soft and Wet, it has special abilities with Shaban balls. But the abilities are completely different. Kira's stand is like a soap bubble that just explodes when you touch it, as opposed to Soft and Wet that robs you of something. It has the same statue and bomb ability as the stand Killer Queen of Kira Yoshikage in part 4, but it has a Shaban ball and the method of activating the bomb is different." End quote. Also, part 8 Killer Queen has like a question mark on all of its stats, even though the stand in the guide was just compared to the OG part 4 Killer Queen. This is just nonsense, okay? So basically in all these translations, all that's stated for these stands is that they have the same appearance, personality, tactics, abilities, etc., with like some minor differences, but straight up like nothing is just mentioned about their physical stats at all in any way, for or against them. And I know people might try to like nitpick like, oh wait, they said statue for like the Killer Queen. Statue is literally just appearance. Stop it. Anyways, even if you want to get semantical about it and say that the differences like stated don't include anything related to physical stats, that goes both ways, as there's nothing like saying their stats are similar in any way, like an alternate universe stand scaling, right? Which means there's still no evidence to assert that alternate universe stands share the same physical stats as their OG counterparts. And the lack of evidence is evidence that these stands don't share physical stats. Another thing is that Araki couldn't do the bare minimum if you believe that like alternate universe stands like part 3, like in part 7 the world, scale to each other. Could have just said, quote, "refer to JoJo or Go-Go for both stands in regards to their stats," or just say that both stands also share the same like destructive force and speed. Finally, the simple arguments like, "Bro, they look the same, they do the same thing, it's so obviously they have the same physical stats," etc., right? These arguments generally fall under like an association fallacy, in which the quality of one thing must like apply to the like another just because they both share a similar quality. The qualities of, for example, part 3 the world and part 7 the world, because they both share a lot of like similarities, right? Like inequalities. It doesn't mean that we should just assume with no evidence that both stands also just have the same physical stats, unless like direct evidence is shown, like feats or statements wise, right? I've also been looking at part 7 speed scaling again because something has been like bothering me because of how consistent bullet timing / like transonic seems to be compared to like the highest speed feat in the part being like, let's say like Johnny firing Tusk like act 1 and 2 faster than like quote sounds that can reach him, which was calced at like massively hypersonic. Rereading, I realized now how ratty that argument was. I found that JoJo versus about WikiCalc. The sound isn't physically moving towards you like Johnny and Gyro in sound waves. The sounds are contained within their physical word, like quote cut, simply approaching the duo, and when touched with like that sound, they'll be subjected to its effect, that being cut. This also means that the kinetic energy of the Calc can't be used because the interpretation of the quote speed feat is wrong. The guns that were mainly used a lot in Steel Ball Run were the Remington model 1890 and the Colt. The speed of the bullets fired from these pistols like are like from around like let's say 681 miles per hour to like 715 miles per hour, which is completely transonic still. And the other remaining calcs for part 7 like Diego and Gyro dodging bullets results come in like at around superhuman to transonic. The scaling and consistency here checks out. The only speed feats like part 8 really has are just both suspect, but are the only things they have without backscaling to part 7. First is Paisley Park. The feat is that Paisley moves through technology and electrical outlets, so it can be said that the stand can move about 90% the speed of light, as that's the speed of electricity in a wire / outlets is like about 90% the speed of light, right? The stand moves through like electrical technology the same way as Red Hot Chili Pepper from part 4, so maybe the same logic could be applied, but the reason why Red Hot Chili Pepper can move at the speed of light is because he's literally the electricity that travels through like the wires and technology. Meanwhile, Paisley straight up isn't, and doesn't have like the same like speed of light statements as Red Hot Chili Pepper. The final feat is Shakedown like leaves, right? On Shakedown Road. The speed of the leaves like seems to be at least like subsonic plus, which is basically faster than eyesight plus. And the leaves movement can be like caught on like camera on like regular playback, so that does nerf their speed. Or of course you could scale the leaves to Johnny's like Tusk top speed, since they're moving that fast because of Johnny's spin, which would again be transonic. Now this is the point of no return. We're about to explore, in my opinion, the dumbest and most insane argument people use to try to justify like their alternate universe like JoJo scaling is fact, and it all stems from like JoJo Eyes of Heaven, a non-canon JoJo video game. I swear I'm not making this up, okay? Now the argument simply goes as follows: JoJo's Eyes of Heaven is supervised by Araki, and since he supervised it, everything that's shown in the game, like Josuke from part 4 interacting with Josuke from part 8, both being able to fight like Kira from part 4, as well as Gyro and Valentine from part 7 being able to keep up with like Jonathan from part 1. This would mean that the alternate universe scaling is valid because, once again, since Araki himself supervised Eyes of Heaven, this is just how he imagines these fights like, playing out with these alternate universe JoJo characters, like, if they just clash with their OG counterparts, right? Now, before I get down to the nitty gritty, I'll just go over a few things I generally agree with when it comes to Araki supervising the game. The first is I agree with the notion that this is really how these characters would interact if their worlds collided, as I'm pretty sure Araki wouldn't want someone else to supervise and misrepresent like his characters and abilities. Like if Giorno were to do a Fortnite dance and call it a Stan Brown Experience Requiem that has the ability to job, obviously not a very accurate representation of Giorno to the canon we all know, and I'm fine with what Araki writes and says as long as it doesn't like consistently contradict his own character's physical capabilities in relation to the context of this video, okay? Second thing I agree with is that every part like went pretty much the same way they did in canon until Eyes of Heaven happened, which means parts 1 to 6 and parts 7 to 8 scaling should be the same in their isolated universes. Alright, that's where all the stuff I agree with ends, and this is where all the stuff I disagree with begins. I don't agree with the alternate universe scaling to the actual canon of JoJo via Araki's supervision of Eyes of Heaven because of two reasons. The first is that in Eyes of Heaven, the ending of the game drastically changes the JoJo multiverse as a whole. JoJo rewrites the multiverse, or the universe/timelines that were present in Eyes of Heaven, so that everyone within their part of JoJo has a happy ending and their best life after the stories. Plus, not only does like JoJo keep this little Star Platinum like hacks amp, right? But he's in part 4 with Jolene. Clearly, these events aren't canon, obviously. Just read the endings of each JoJo part in the beginning of part 4, please. Come on. But what can be extrapolated is that these events have to take place in an alternate multiverse separate from the one we know in canon, which would mean that the part 7 to 8 characters scaling to the part 1 to 6 characters is only valid in this alternate universe, where the part 7 to 8 character scaling changes so drastically from what we know in canon, leading to like a vast amount of contradictions that from what's already shown in each part and what I've already established and proved before moving on to the subject of Eyes of Heaven. All this unnecessary confusion and mental gymnastics stemming from, once again, a non-canon JoJo video game.
But Jobber, like the stuff you agreed with, like the character being accurate representation of themselves, their power, their abilities in scaling for like their own respective parts, apply here as well. That would mean I can make an argument that GER was out of character and his ability was different against Dio over Heaven.
Okay, the answer to all that, like, bullcrap is no. As even though this is an alternate multiverse, from what I've already, like, said before about alternate universe stands like part 3 of the world and part 7 of the world, it's not inconsistent for them to act the same and have the same abilities and look the same, etc. Okay? If anything, it's highly consistent. For example, D4C makes Diego interact with an alternate universe version of himself that's exactly the same as the OG Dio with the same stand, right? Like, he's the same abilities, all that type of stuff. And there's many more, like, of the same Diegos and Valentines that come out of the universe, of course, which should, of course, apply to the characters of the part 1 to 6 universe. Also, GR's ability is literally the same in Eyes of Heaven as is canon, even described as like such too, especially considering that similar to life shot being applied to the opponent via, like GR like striking them, right? It's the same with like RTZ, right? As like GR just struck Diablo and RTZ soon, just took effect, right? Like how it's like presented here against, Dio over Heaven. So please stop the cope, GR fans. The second and final thing I disagree with is, I guess I would call this the best case scenario rather than the worst case, because I generally want this alternate universe JoJo scaling to be true. That would buff the hell out of the part 7 to 8 like verse, like considerably physically too, because dear god they need. The best case scenario is that these stands and alternate universe characters just simply scale to each other, either because of the world and Killer Queen being in like the part 7 to 8 universe. Now I would ask a person if this is consistent scaling for the part 7 to 8 characters, because this would make them go from like City Block and Transonic to small City Level Plus and Massive Fashion Light Plus, which is a pretty big big jump, okay? Now, would there be a lot of things in part 7 to 8 that would go against this idea? And the next thing I heard was a claim so absurd and insane that is officially plastered on my wall as like with the award of being the craziest claim I've ever heard. Quote, JoJo part 7 to 8 have no anti-feats. And keep in mind, this is towards the idea that these characters in part 7 to 8 like have small seed level durability and massively faster light plus speeds. Okay, reality check. So 90% of part 7 is literally people shooting bullets at each other, getting tagged, knocked out, and almost like dying too, right? The point I'm trying to get across is that there is an abundance of anti-feats in part 7 that go against these characters having such an absurd amount of speed and durability like small seed level and massive faster light plus. And to say they don't have any anti-feats or not like many that just go against that kind of scaling is just insane, and generally makes me believe that the people that make those types of arguments are probably biased. And I swear to God, if someone brings up like, oh, Jobber, you can make the same like argument with Mista for part 5, I'm gonna slap you. Watch my Mista video. He's trash. No one cares about him. Now, back to the subject. Keep in mind that in terms of speed feats, part 8 can only backscale to part 7 because they don't really have any, and the only one they have is tied to Johnny's spin. And of course, once again, these part 7 to 8 characters have no physical feats or statements for their power and speed that comes even close to the part 1 to like 6 universes feats, okay? Now, the final thing people will question is that,
well, Jobber, why don't you apply the same logic to the parts 1 to 6 universe? There's anti-feats in those parts too to warrant the lower end scaling being valid.
and I agree that there's anti-feats in JoJo parts like 1 to 6. It's just that the difference here is that the higher end scaling, as some people would call it, like town to small seed level plus and like faster than light to massive faster than light plus stuff, is far more consistent in the parts 1 to 6 universe than any anti-feats presented in them, unlike the part 7 to 8 universe. It's also, once again, just doesn't help that there's no feats or statements to support these part 7 to 8 characters having small sea level AP and durability and being massively faster than plus in speed. Like, bro, just look at all these like images, okay? Like, Tusk Act 1 can't even move faster than the goddamn bullet. Like, matter of fact, it only moves in tandem with it. It never like outspeeds it. Like, this is consistent throughout the entire part, just with all these other characters' abilities too. Like, this is insane. And this would be like worse considering if this was just, or assuming this was just Tusk Act 2 being fired, okay? Anyways, that's all I wanted to say because people be wiling out on alternate universe JoJo scaling and it grinds my gears. The bigger lesson is, if y'all want Funny Valentine to win against Senator Armstrong, for heaven's sake, just give him D4C Love Train. Alright, peace out.